everyone. I think you can hear us. I hope you can hear us. So we're in another part of COP26 of the buildings here today from yesterday. A very busy part, many delegates walking past to get to the big plenary halls where they're discussing next steps, countries' contributions, climate finance today. And I'm really delighted to be here today with Frederico Ballone, who is actually one of the expressions of synchronistic events that happen around COP26 all the time. Because we happened to meet on a dark night on Sunday at a bus stop where a bus wasn't running, then started walking in the same direction, found out that we have many mutual friends and are working in very similar areas. As many of you know, for many years, I was working as the CEO of the Global Eco-Village Network, working on regenerative community building across the globe. So Frederico is dedicated to unleash the regenerative power of nature, food, and agriculture to reverse the effects of climate change on planet and people. And he also works with the Athena Hub for Social Change, which is a social enterprise, again, dedicated to transforming the individual and collective capacity to build a thriving future. He combines systems analysis and systems change with contemplative practices, which I'm specifically also interested in, that combination, because that's quite a deep combination for the networks around Thomas Hübl as well, and brings us together with sustainability. And you might remember that here at COP26, there has been an agreement between 100 governments, including Brazil, that have signed up to stopping and reversing deforestation across the planet by 2030. I said one of these countries is Brazil. And just in the past years, actually, Brazil has increased their amount of deforestation of the Amazon. Between 2010 and 2020, 4.7 million hectares of forest have been cut down. And yes, we're speaking a lot about tree planting, but planting small trees is just the beginning. For these trees to actually grow up into the beautiful giants that can really decarbonize the atmosphere, takes time. So we'll go deeper into some of those topics, and I'm just super glad to be here with you, Federico. Thank you for joining us. And I'd love to start by just asking you whether you could describe to us, in your words, what is regenerative agriculture?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I will split that word into two. It's regenerative agriculture. So you must really first talk about regeneration, which doesn't just apply to agriculture. Regeneration, as I see it, is a design principle. It's a paradigm through which you can confront the reality. So we have regenerative organizations, we have regenerative placemaking, we have regenerative, a lot of things. Communities, network. So if you take that side of the word, I like to simplify it for people, which is regenesis, recreate, to give back. If I put it into more technical language, I would say it's how do you ensure that over time you have more of what? More biomass, more biodiversity, better social relationships, more trust, better communities. And we can design for these things. We've done it on many different occasions. You know from your experience with the Global Eco-Village Network. Permaculture does that. Permaculture is just one design method. So
and maybe even to say that the work we do in the Pocket Project on healing individual, ancestral, and collective trauma is really about regenerating our nervous systems. Absolutely. And the capacity of our nervous systems to sensitively listen and respond.
Absolutely.
around
And
us.
it's
So it's
slightly
also
better than
regeneration.
restoring, because restoring is a little bit static. I can
Yeah.
restore a forest by planting trees, as you were saying. But to regenerate it would actually mean to recreate its ability to function, its ecology, the relationships between the different parts of that system. So regeneration is possibly the highest expression of a functioning system or living system or other system. When we apply it to agriculture, it's what we have known through many traditions, like I mentioned permaculture, but it could be biodynamic agriculture, agroecology. They're essentially methods, they're essentially design methods that share in common that over time, those systems become more complex, more elaborate, more functioning. They imitate nature, and as such, they give a lot of co-benefits, right? So it's not just about producing more and better yields, but to have more biodiversity, to preserve water, to decrease the need for inputs, and so on. So today, regenerative agriculture is being used as a bit of a encompassing term for these kinds of techniques. At best, it's also becoming a very popular term. So, like everything, all terms can be appropriated and abused. This is no exception. And at the moment, we're witnessing a certain back and forth with, well, what exactly does this mean?
Yeah.
So there's all of that going on, but
Yeah.
at its essence, I hope is what I described.
Yeah, beautiful. And just, I can also, even when you speak about the contemplative practices being a part of what you do, as you go into what inspired you to dedicate your life's energy to this? Where was this born? And I remember also that part of the synchronicity that we spoke about was not just our mutual friends, but also that your wife is deeply engaged now with the work of Thomas and is bringing Thomas Hubel and is bringing the work of collective trauma healing and mediation to her work.
Absolutely.
So what inspires you and your wife to do this work?
A lot of
speak
things.
For yourself.
A lot of things. And she's obviously the better half. She's the smartest one of the two. I can't really speak for her, but in terms of an approach, something that she always says that I always go back to is she's a sociologist by training. And she always says the quality of a process of social change is determined by the quality of your observation. So how you observe something or how you relate to something will change the outcome. Anybody that is into any kind of contemplative practice understands that. And what we see out there is a reflection of what we have in here. So it's about connection. Unfortunately, that has gotten lost a little bit in our modern societies. You only need to look at any of many traditional wisdom traditions. I'm sorry, they all knew this. I mean, I come from a Catholic background, and we have the myth of Genesis, and we have mysticism, we have Saint Francis, we have so much to learn from. But the Buddhists and the Hindu, everybody knew this. I guess it was. I don't want to idealize that in the old days we lived better. Rather, I tend to think that over time we've learned wisdom, and that wisdom has endured and kept us alive for many centuries. And we should always try and go back to that. Externally, as the second part of the question, where I'm most interested in, my journey began about maybe 20 years ago in the Amazon, where we were using permaculture to work with indigenous communities to be self-sufficient in a way that was regenerative. We didn't call it that at the time. And that's how I was introduced to permaculture. That's how I learned that we could imitate nature and live better and be self-sufficient and not need so many things and not need to import stuff to work with what we had here. And that's where I got it. I'm like, yes, sustainability is possible. It's just not making it into the mainstream because when you look at how we produce food conventionally, it's actually very different. To your point about Brazil, where I lived for 16 years, well, one of the main drivers of that deforestation is agriculture. 80% of tropical deforestation is caused by agriculture. So there is no way to stop deforestation without looking at agriculture. And the way to stop expanding the agricultural frontier is by doing it regeneratively. So I'm convinced that that is the answer. I'm convinced that the solutions exist. There are many of them. And they need to, we do need to do more of that. They need to be scaled up.
Yeah, beautiful. And, I was on another panel with Vandana Shiva, where she spoke about the power of the Earth Mother to create abundance. And it was a very touching way that she expressed how Earth has worked with life to create more life on our planet. So the very intelligent systems, we don't quite know where this comes from, but what we can say is that before life on the planet, we had 98% of carbon in Earth's atmosphere. And then through the amazing technology of biosynthesis, life slowly started decarbonizing our atmosphere until today, where we have only 0.04% of carbon in our atmosphere. And what we're doing as humanity is, of course, releasing that carbon back by burning oil and coal and gas. So all the leftovers of life that is being released back. So just thinking about the power of nature to decarbonize the atmosphere from 98% to 0.04% maybe gives us an idea about the power of nature. And with this, I mean green nature, I mean trees and plants. And the other thing I just want to say is we had a wonderful Indigenous leader, Pat McCabe, speak to us 2 evenings ago, that was really speaking to how, as human beings, we need to find back our place on the hoop of life, where we are embedded in life and give back to life in a way which honors that all the other living beings on this planet, the other species, actually came before us. So just, bringing this in, I would love to hand back to you and just see, what is the power of healing that lies within this transition to regenerative agriculture, regenerative food production?
Wow, that's a big question.
Well,
But when I think about it, to me, what is healing? Healing is reconnecting. When we're unwell, when we're ill, it's because something is out of whack, something disconnected, something was severed. Traditional medicine recognizes this. So when you go to Chinese acupuncture, what do? They reconnect with their needles. Indigenous medicine does that too. Western medicine understands that too with its meditation. So I think our sickness comes from the disconnect. That disconnect, if you look at how we produce food, for example, it couldn't be more disconnected from life. We use technology that was initially developed to create bombs to produce fertilizer with fossil fuel. So the most energy intensive component of conventional agriculture is fertilizer production, built with machines that are meant to do bombs. And we pump synthetic nitrogen into the soil to extract just one thing, a commodity, instead of the many things that we could be using. So large scale, the kind of farming that is creating a problem, because not all farming creates a problem. It's more like mining than agriculture.
that's correct.
It's more like an extractive activity, it's nutrient mining, where profits come from scale, and then when things it's grown in one place to be shipped to another, and then another, and then the carbon footprint goes up. That all says disconnect to me. That's not how a natural system would organize itself. And anybody who's done an introductory course of agriculture understands that, right? And in that comes the sickness. We are consuming this. The planet is sick. Um,
The food itself
food itself is not good.
hardly has
We
nutrition.
lose
So
nutrition.
yeah.
Yuval Harari says in his book Homo Sapiens that we're in a very particular moment in history where today more people die because of excess of food than lack of it. So we've got obesity, pandemics, malnutrition. So we have a system that generates a lot of waste. I can give you some numbers, but I don't think that's the objective here. But it wastes more than it produces in terms of money. Produces hunger on one end and obesity on the other. It's sick. It's a system that is not sinking anymore. And somehow that all reflects on us, be it in obesity, hunger, climate crisis, the pesticides in our water.
70% of diseases are fueled by very processed food.
Or the opposite. I've read that the top reasons for premature death in North America, where I now live, in underserved communities, are diet related. So diet related, so diabetes, cholesterol, and cardiovascular disease, because we've opted for a model of food that prioritizes shelf life and low price. So it's that packaged product in the center aisle of your supermarket, and that's not food. It's a concoction. So that's where I think the sickness comes from.
That's right.
And the cure, the healing comes from reversing that. Eating more and more varied products produced locally that don't have a huge footprint and are healthy for you.
Yeah, and as you know, I've lived in eco-villages. I've built eco-villages myself, and I have to say I was completely astonished moving into, for instance, one of the eco-villages in Germany, which was built on monoculture, agricultural land and monoculture forest. And just transforming that over 10 years and watching biodiversity move in. I think all of us who've been active in this area have been absolutely astonished by the capacity of nature
It's a miracle.
it's like we say yes a little bit and nature comes, sometimes we say like you take one step towards God and God takes 100 steps towards you.
Absolutely.
Well, the same is true with nature. You start and it just comes. And I think many of us now also during the lockdown, like I personally have stopped flying and finally get to garden. And already, after a year, I'm producing like 80% of my vegetables. And it's just so easy. Like it just grows, So,
but so many people haven't had that experience.
Yes. And that's crazy, right?
It's crazy.
Yeah.
I think of these eco villages, or I think in an ideal world, what is contemplation? It's to be in the temple, right? So when I go to a forest, it's like a temple. I look at it and I draw a lot from it.
Can you say more to that? Because people say that I go to a forest and it's like a temple.
Yeah.
Can you be more precise?
Well, look at perhaps a closer example. What most people as a temple, I think, will think something like a religious temple. That we associate that word to that.
Yeah.
A church, a mosque, a synagogue, what have you.
Yeah.
Well, what is a temple? It's a physical place that evokes something that is higher than my humanity. It's spiritual. It's something happens there that you connect to something bigger than yourself. That's what a temple does. Well, it doesn't have to be a religious temple. It can be a natural temple, right? When you walk into a living system like the ocean or reef, the forest, savanna, grassland, or wetland, you connect to something bigger than yourself. And therefore, you contemplate. So I think we're in desperate needs of these places. And then, as you said, not just life comes back, but so does life and spirit. That's healing too. We're seeing forest bathing and all kinds of activities happening for the very obvious effects that occur when you step into the temple deliberately.
Yeah, and as you speak about the forest being temple, I also realize, and maybe this is an inspiration for all of us, that every I was speaking to Tyson Yunkaporta, who's the author of Sand Talks, and he's an Aborigine from Australia. And he speaks about the sacredness of every relationship that we have, and the fact that relationships are very specific. So our relationship to the earth where we are born, but also that we can rebuild the connections that we were speaking about very specifically. So you can relate to one plant in your home. You can relate to one bird in your garden or on your balcony that comes, one tree in your street. And you can build this relationship into a sacred place where information can come.
And with that well-being and a feeling of wholesomeness and health.
Yeah.
So that's what healing is.
So can you say more about here at the United Nations Climate Change Conference, what is the place of regenerative agriculture in the agenda of countries?
Yeah.
What is happening? Are there successes? Is it more promises without real implementation, or what can you say?
Sure. No, this is definitely a different COP. I think that, well, if you want a 1-minute crash course in what's going on in this field, basically we're emitting too much carbon. That's warming up the atmosphere. And what the Paris Agreement says is that in order to stay within not great but safe limits, we should limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees, no more than 1.5 degrees by 2050. What that means in more proximate terms is having all of the emissions of the world by half by 2030, the next 9 years, by half, and then doing that again by 2050. So I compare it to studying for exams, right? If you think you're going to cram the night before and pass, it's not going to happen. You have to be studying a lot today. And it's the same thing with cutting down emissions. So the way that's going to happen, and if you're interested in looking more up, Drawdown by Paul Hawken is an excellent example.
Oh, just to say, we've got Drawdown, and we're interviewing Drawdown next week.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
That
so
is
we'll hear more. So
that is an
great.
amazing resource.
Yeah.
And I always use a diagram by them. It looks like a rainbow. It's amazing. And it says all the sectors they're emitting, and each sector is going to have to reduce about a third of its. Realistically, we can reduce that to a third. So reductions are going to come from that. If better industry, and all these pledges are being made here.
Yeah.
Another third is going to stay in the atmosphere, because we're not saying we're going back to 0 with 1.5. So we're going to use the atmosphere as a sink, which is not ideal. And the other third is going to have to get sucked back into a sink, the earth or the ocean. Without that, the whole Paris equation doesn't work. Therefore, the power of agriculture to, as you were saying, sequester, horrible term. We should use some more life-giving terms on sequestering, but to absorb carbon and other gases from the atmosphere and store them in life makes the whole equation work. And we have a lot of work to do in that department.
Just a question, because it's interesting that you say, the word sequester is not so inspiring somehow. And it's true, like if I think of it like that this is just meant to go back into the earth. But if we would have, all houses vertical greening, roofs green across cities, trees planted across gardens, trees planted across streets around the world. It's like some cities have become green and it's better for everyone. And they're like parks to walk through. We can do so much. How much carbon could be stored in all the living creatures at any one time, because it's life. And if everything was green,
yes.
How much carbon would be there?
You would think that is the most important question on the planet right now.
Yeah.
And that we would have
a good answer.
All of the scientists. We've got some very good scientists answering that question. Drawdown, which is hundreds of scientists, has a number.
Yeah.
And they say that by 2050, about 270 gigatons of CO2 equivalent, pardon the technicism,
Yeah.
to be sequestered. That's about 30% of all the reduction. So that's very considerable. And about half of those are agricultural solutions. Half of that prize. Another very good study is called Exponential Roadmap, done by Johan Rockström, a very known scientist. And they're coincident. Only they project to 2030, sorry, because that's the cutoff point. And they say that it could be anywhere between a minimum of it was 24 gigatons, a maximum of 98, and a best average of 50. That's a lot of numbers, but perhaps the thing to take away is the two main things where you have the biggest ticket, as it were, to the position would be reforestation. Reforestation done with quality. And the other one is grazing management, understanding it's not to produce meat, but to produce meat or different kinds of meat in a way that isn't the most destructive way possible, which is how we're doing it right now. Those two alone would be the two biggest tickets to 2030.
Yeah, beautiful. And I know that, in Africa, I'm from South Africa, so Zimbabwe, Zambia, many other places where grazing actually is a part of the savannah. And, I know also in the USA, the prairies, replenishing themselves. So how can we really include animals living as part of our caretaking? So, which really means, again, taking our place in the group of life and planning or dreaming or learning from all other creatures. Yeah. So
can I give you an example? Do we have time?
Yeah, please. We have 1 more minute.
Well, from those countries, a very well-known person is Alan Savory, Zimbabwean, and he studied how the great herbivores of the prairies in Africa worked and what happened when they stomped the ground in very concentrated moments, and they ate up the top part of the grass. They defecated on there and they fertilized that, stumped the most up the soil, and moved on, and then left it for very long times to restore. And the roots weren't affected. In fact, the roots grow stronger, and it's in the roots where the carbon stays. They've developed that, a humanized version of that, which is rotational grazing, where you do this with cattle and you kind of imitate what those natural systems are doing. That's working with nature, not against it. If you look at, that's the good meat. The bad meat is called a feeding lot, where we forget all of that. We build a building, we stuff it with stuff that comes from all over the world. We lock the cows in there and they emit the methane. You know the story. So those are two different examples. One is life-giving and the other one is life-destroying.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, in the depth of this topic is the depth of how we are willing to take our interbeing seriously and allow ourselves to truly be embedded back into life. And I want to thank you so much, Federico, for being here with us today. It's great to have these different voices come in and bringing also different aspects of the wisdom and intelligence to the table. And I want to invite you all to come back to us tonight, 7 p.m. UK, where Thomas Hubel will be with us to speak about the anatomy of inaction. And I just want to bring one example of inaction, which touched me very deeply. We have a big Scottish farmer who's our neighbor, who actually breeds cattle and has 8 farms across Scotland. And when I first started speaking to him about soils and the regeneration of soils, he said, we know in Scotland that we are degrading our soils year after year after year by putting all these chemicals into them. And we know that in a decade or 2 decades, these soils will no longer be fertile. And we don't know how to stop. We don't know how to get out of this cyclical, you could say, traumatic cycle of destroying our Earth. So this is what we're going to speak about with Thomas Hubel tonight at 7 p.m. And please join us again. And thank you, Federico.
Thank you.
It was an absolute joy meeting you. I can't wait to meet your wife as well. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much. It's an honor.
Go well, everyone.